Hello, this is Mary Page from Chicago, and welcome to this week's Rights in Russia interview on the situation for human rights defenders in Russia. Today, our guest is Roman Kiselev, the head of the legal programs of the Moscow-Helsinki group. He has degrees in political science from the Higher School of Economics in Moscow and in human rights law from Middlesex University in London. He's also worked as an attorney for the London-based European Human Rights Advocacy Center, and among his many other responsibilities, he is currently working on issues related to freedom of expression. Thank you for joining us, Roman, and sharing
Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, this is great, and sharing your expertise to help us better understand the environment for human rights defenders in today's
Russia. It is my pleasure.
Terrific. I have some questions that I'd like to pose to kind of frame the interview, which I hope we can finish in about 30 minutes. So let's get started with my first question. The Moscow-Helsinki group, founded in 1976, is the oldest human rights organization in Russia. So what does that history mean for a young activist like yourself?
I have to say that this is a great privilege and responsibility at the same time, because when you are employed by such organization, it is a great opportunity to use its resources and public standing for your own projects. But at the same time, you always have to keep in mind the influence which your work have on the name of the organization and its reputation. And of course, when we are talking about Moscow-Helsinki group, which unites a lot of famous and quite old, but not just in age-wise, quite old human rights defenders. This is a great responsibility, which I'm trying to hold, and so so it's very difficult in a sense, but it's at the same time very easy, because again it provides you lots of connections. Moscow-Helsinki group has more than 20 members all across Russia, and those are very influential people from the field of human rights, former dissidents. Some of them spend years in prison. Some of them are younger and more connected to the modern history of Russia. And in that sense, I think it's an organization which tries to keep old and new together and enrich each other this way. And so it's very challenging, but quite enriching.
Perfect. So could you tell us a little bit about your current role in the Moscow-Helsinki group? What is it that you do there?
It's sometimes it's very difficult to specify what exactly I'm doing for the reasons of our current situation, because currently human rights defenders and civil society in general are in the defensive position in Russia, and this also implies some certain budgetary restrictions and limitations. And for this reason, Moscow-Helsinki group had to cut down its former size of number of employees, and for these reasons, we need to attend to different activities at the same time. And although my general focus is legal work, and I'm trying to develop legal projects surrounding human rights, but at the same time, these projects usually involve not just the legal work in itself, but also advocacy and some other activities which would benefit this or that project. And so, for example, currently I lead a couple of projects related to the situation in Belarus, and for this reason, I also prepare legal documents, legal positions on the case, communicated to Russian and international authorities, And at the same time, sometimes I need to write some news articles for journals in order to advance our cause, to notify people about the work which we're doing. So yeah, so many different things for this reason.
So this work that you're doing on Belarus, could you talk a little bit about sort of the similarities that you might see between the situations in Russia and in Belarus these days, and what might be the differences?
Mm-hmm. So I have to start with the fact that in August, when the protests have started in Belarus, I was in Minsk myself, the capital of Belarus, and I spent there more than a month. And I was involved in different kinds of human rights activities. I was one of the organizers of the volunteer camp next to famous prison of Krestino, and we were conducting searches of people, creating lists of people missing or harmed in one way or the other. And later on, Moscow, partly due to my activities, Moscow Helsinki Group has become a partner of International Committee for Investigation of Torture in Belarus, which was created mostly by Belarusian NGOs, but we were also quite an important actor in this project. And later on my return, I continued some of those projects here, and specifically related to some human rights violations with regards to Russian citizens. So, and there are different kinds of variations of the problems, which I'm going to tell you later about. But speaking about similarities and answering to your question, the things which I saw there in 2020, those things were unprecedented. And I have never seen anything or felt anything like that before. When people are getting fired with rubber bullets in clothes, when they're getting shot with, I don't know, they're called stun grenades, I guess. But the fact is that they're just mutilating people with shells. And I nearly managed to get hurt myself once or twice, and was in a situation of absolute stress. So no, I have never seen things like this in Russia. And I remember Belarusian people, which I knew at the time, that they were asking me questions like, "But you have this in Russia, do you?" And I had to tell them, "No, no, I've never seen anything like that. Russian police do not use rubber bullets. They do not use stun grenades. They do not use terror tactics in order to disperse the crowds. I mean, in the most dire way, when you're just driving lots of unmarked cars. All the police is wearing uh, the body armor, and they're covering their faces with masks. So it felt like you were in. I don't really like to make such crude comparisons, but honestly, I remember that um, every single time I had a parallel in my mind that I'm in some kind of an occupied city, that a foreign country, like in 1940s, is occupying my country, and now I'm just like in this state of constant defense. And getting back to the question of similarities, when I returned back to Russia, and in a couple of months, the protests have started already in Russia in January 2021. I started to notice some similarities because evidently Russian authorities saw some useful tactics which they can incorporate in their own operations here when they're trying to disperse peaceful assemblies. And again, the police is wearing full body armor, even when there is no signs of possible violence on the streets. Now they started to use masks, so they're covering their faces. And if before at least you could look in the face of the police officer, now you can't. You can just look at his eyes or her eyes. And they're covering their police badges in order not to identify them, and they just in general are getting more and more aggressive, and this is what's absolutely frightening. And the last thing which I wish to say is that some civil activists managed to uncover public procurements done on behalf of a so-called Russian Guard, which is like a paramilitary force in the employ of the government, and they are buying in mass stun grenades and I don't know, some pistols and other firearms which are using rubber bullets. So it seems that they are getting prepared for new scenarios in the future, and this is absolutely frightening to me.
So speaking of the protests, I know that one of your primary concerns has been with issues related to freedom of expression. And so I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the general level of freedom of expression in Russia, and with some particular examples, perhaps.
Okay, so in general, again, I need to point out straight away that 2021 brought lots of changes to the existing status quo in Russia in the field of human rights, and it started again, I guess, in the middle of 2020. Some new legislative initiatives were created in order to restrict freedom of expression, but if we're speaking in general, like for the last 5 years, I wouldn't say that the pressure is extremely hard. And the reason for that is that, I guess, is that we are living in modern times when there is an internet with lots of degrees of freedom, and the government is not really sure how to react on that. Although they are trying to, for example, to take down certain websites, to ask providers of the internet to take down certain materials. They are trying to fine big corporations like Google, for example, for violation of Russian laws in certain aspects of the freedom of expression, and asking them to turn down the videos as well. And the pressure is mounting, but at the same time, again, the capacity of the government is limited due to the fact that most of the most important, I guess, social networks, and where the discussion is actually happening, are based on foreign service, and it limits the capacity of the government to infringe the people's capacity to speak out. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that there won't be any repercussions for those people. So maybe your material won't be taken down, but you may get fined. And when we're talking about certain examples, well, there are a couple of tactics which the government can use in order to control the freedom of expression. One of them is, for example, to use lawsuits, the so-called SLAP lawsuits. These are the lawsuits aimed at financially bankrupting certain people in order to show this terrifying example to others. And the very famous case is the case of Prigozhin against Alexei Navalny, Lyubov Sobol, and some other people employed in the famous fund against corruption. And there's a huge lawsuit, for example, for at least 80 million rubles. And in reality, this means that those people have to sell everything they've got in order to pay this huge bill back. And it's it's just impossible. And now we, as regular citizens, we have to keep in mind that there are some certain people which are ready to fight and to punish you, basically, for your ability to speak. And the reason why they were fined, this is a quite hilarious case. So Lyubov Sobol, which is a famous opposition activist, she has done an investigation on the low quality of meals in schools in Moscow. And there was a moment when some certain amount of kids get poisoned because of low quality of food provided in those schools. And the reality is that most of those meals are provided by a single company, which is in the ownership of Mr. Prigozhin, which is a close friend of Mr. Putin. And so they managed actually in court to uh, um, to acknowledge the fact that that the quality of the food was actually the reason why those kids got poisoned. But in the end, Prigozhin somehow managed to win the lawsuit on defamation. And asks for a compensation of 80 million rubles. So still they haven't paid it because it's just impossible to pay it out. Yeah, so this is like one of the examples which comes to mind. But the other tactic to combat freedom of speech is quite obvious: is to send people to jails. And there are many examples of the application of law on how it's called. Offense of religious feelings. Yes, and so basically, if you're writing something about the religion in a negative way, or maybe even neutral way, but in a way which wasn't really pleasing to some people, which consider themselves to be a part of a religious group, they may ask the government to punish you, and there are manifold of examples when people got either fined or even sentenced to prison sentences for publishing some negative things about religion. And very famous case is the case of Ruslan Sokolovsky in 2017. This was one of the first major cases under this law. And the story was that he's a famous blogger, and he made a video how he catches. Maybe you don't remember, but in 2017 there was a very popular mobile game which is called Pokemon Go, and so the idea behind the game was this, like you're walking around with your own phone and you can see the Pokemons on the actual sites, and you have to catch them. And so he decided to catch a Pokemon in the church, and so the government didn't really like that, and he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But how it's called when you don't have actually to serve the prison sentence, but you may, if you will violate the law in the future. Suspended sentence, right? Yes, and so basically, there are many different ways the government combats freedom of expression, and currently honestly, it's difficult even to say what is a lawful speech and what is not. And this is, for me as a human rights defender, is the major case, because to claim that certain types of speech are illegal is okay. We can debate about this. We, at least because we are members of the Council of Europe, and we are members of the European Convention on Human Rights, we acknowledge that the freedom of speech is not absolute, and it's a qualified right, and we have to limit in certain aspects here and there to find some borders of lawful speech. But at the same time, the problem that those laws and their application is absolutely arbitrary, and in certain situations they're certainly based on some political motivation. And for this reason, it's very difficult to say what's the actual limitations and where and what actually you can say and where. And this is, for me personally, is the most important danger which is present at the moment. Yes. So I think that's it.
In the work that you do you face any specific risks yourself? And more generally, what are the risks that human rights defenders might face in Russia?
I'd say that uh, the same way how I do not know what is actually lawful speech or not, I do not know where the danger actually lies. I mean, there are certain things which I know may pose a greater risk than the others. So, for example, um, I know that the work related to the Northern Caucasus, and specifically to Chechnya, is extremely risky endeavor, and many human rights defenders were killed because of their work there. And if you are not accurate enough in the way you are describing things there, you may really attract lots of attention, and this may bring in due course some repercussions. And this is like the major thing. The second field, I guess, or the topic, which may pose a greater risk, is when you're getting more involved with clearly political issues. So I'd say that on levels of danger is here's the politics and here's the human rights activities. And when you're getting more in this political field with your human rights activities, you are getting more danger than you would have been otherwise. So, for example, I do not recall that many cases of sentences specifically against human rights defenders, but against human rights defenders which are getting involved, for example, with electoral rights, or which try to protect some political prisoners. That is a bit more dangerous thing to get involved with. But personally, I know there are certain risks to what I'm doing, and I guess the last year showed that those risks are increasing, and we know that we are constantly monitored, that our names are known, that anytime we may may experience searches by the government, and that but still, I don't know, somehow we managed to find some positive things about this job. It's quite challenging, at the same time interesting and emotionally rewarding when you actually manage to help people. But it's not easy, definitely. And specifically, my greatest concern is the well-being of my family, and for example, like my parents, lots of my siblings. Currently, they are not involved in politics or human rights at all, but we know some examples when your relatives may get harmed in one way or the other due to your own activities. And this is, I mean, because I'm ready to take risks, but I'm not ready to uh, imply though that my relatives are also ready to those risks.
You know, the Western media tends to paint a very bleak picture of human rights in Russia, and I'm wondering if it's how you see the portrayal of human rights in Russia by the Western media. Is it yeah, I mean, you've mentioned some of the bleak aspects, and we talked about the positive aspects for you. Are there positive things going on that the Western media just miss?
Uh, this is kind of interesting because previously, when we were writing our human rights reports, we usually had a certain goal every single time. That goal was to find some positive developments. Unfortunately, those positive developments are quite limited the last year. And but speaking about the portrayal itself, Well, sometimes it's really not accurate, and that's just a fact. But that's the reality which any mass media, I guess, has to deal with. That you're quite far away, you don't usually have an access to the field, or you have some low quality information, or you're just sometimes lazy. Those things happen, and even Russian mass media usually butchers some things about human rights and paints quite a bleak picture than there is actually one. And speaking about the picture which is getting presented, we also have to keep in mind that mass media, they're usually commercial entities, and they need reaction and sympathy. And for this reason, the negativity usually brings more of that. But I wouldn't say that that picture is not absolutely clear and accurate. And in many ways, they are getting the right point. But speaking about some positive things, um, hmm, well, in general, I would say that social rights are not that bad in Russia. uh, yeah, in certain aspects, although usually, yeah, to be honest, really, this is a kind of interesting point which I usually like to make. I'm not a huge fan of the Soviet heritage, but the reality is that partly due to this past, we managed to inherit, I don't know, free medicine, I mean, free healthcare and free education. And although sometimes the quality of it may be doubtful, but nevertheless, you have capacity and ability actually to receive a proper education and to receive a medical care. And this is a great advantage. And I know that many, for example, European countries and the United States sometimes experience problems with this when we come to the question of the student debt, so on and so forth. And although again those fields and issues are not perfect in Russia, but I guess that it's a good thing.
And so, looking to the future, kind of what do you think the future holds for human rights in
In
Russia?
Russia.
Yeah.
Well, this is a quite interesting thing is that there was a famous Russian economist, Sergei Guriev, and he likes to talk about the economics and to interview some other economists on how we actually can fix Russian economy and make it grow. But lots of those experts, they end up with political issues that you can't fix it without political change and the change of the regime itself, which exists right now. And I'm afraid that the same thing I can say about human rights. I mean, I like to use this phrase, but uh, I sometimes feel like my work is a certain type of a bandage, you know. So the body is bleeding, and we're trying to put bandages, but we're not actually fixing the problem itself. And so long as we're gonna have the deficient legal system which does not operate in any rational way, so long as we're gonna continue to put people which are ready to speak up in prison, so long as we won't have an accountable government, free elections, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I cannot paint a really positive picture of of the future of human rights in Russia. And the latest tendencies show the absolute deterioration of the system of the issues of the stance of human rights in general, and it feels like I guess we need ourselves to get a bit more political. I know this is not that some people would not agree on this course of action because it is presumed that human rights defenders, they have to keep their integrity and do not get involved in political struggle. And in a certain sense, that is true. But when the whole system goes down and you're just ending up with the state of terror, I'm not quite sure that there's much space left for impartiality. You may not get involved like in major political movements or anything like that, but anyways, most of your demands will be political in its nature. Yeah, so yes, something like that. So the future is uncertain.
So big questions ahead, and I wish we could continue this conversation, but I'm afraid now we've run out of time. So thank you so much, Roman, for this opportunity and for a most stimulating half hour. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for letting me speak up,
Great.
because this is a necessity.